Good evening and welcome to God Speaks. I'm your host and teacher, Markita Brooks, and I am very excited about the season that we're entering into. The Biblical New Year starts this Friday, March 16th at sundown, and that first day of the new year goes to sundown March 17th. Now, tonight's Bible study is all about this Biblical New Year, its connection to Passover, and why it's important to you. But there are a few announcements that I want to make beforehand so that as we're going into the teaching, I can refer back to things that are coming up and why they are significant. God is making some tremendous shifts in the spiritual realm for the body of believers, for Israel. All types of things are happening. And we're going to see a lot happening in this biblical new year. I've been actually preparing you for this from January 6th with God Speaks into 2018. And the word for 2018 was the year of the standard. But remember, I shared with you that that word doesn't really start to reach its climax until the biblical new year starts. So we actually start to see, we will see the year of the standard starting March 16th at sundown. And so it's going to be very important that we are aligning ourselves with God's calendar this year, because this is the year of the standard. From January 1 to sundown March 16th, we have been preparing for the year of the standard, but we will enter the biblical year of the standard March 16th at sundown. Now, we are having a special biblical New Year's service. We're preparing for the coming of our King, and that's going to be on Shabbat, because the biblical New Year actually, that New Year's Day is on Shabbat this year. And so we'll be having a special service this Shabbat, this Saturday, March 17th, and it'll be at 3 p.m. Please note it, remember it, it's at 3 p.m. because we are also kicking off our Priesthood Academy this Shabbat. So we'll be starting our Priesthood Academy on the Biblical New Year. And those who are joining the Priesthood Academy by either being tithing members of the Truth in the Spirit or becoming monthly partners, giving $100 or more per month, you can join us at 12:30. We'll be setting up the temple elements and be training as we're doing that. And at 1 o'clock, we will start actually doing the spiritual offerings that are required for the biblical New Year. And I'm going to talk about them tonight. I'm very excited about that because we will be training people for the first time about giving these spiritual offerings, because everything in the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, the law of Moses, and everything in the Tanakh itself, which is the Hebrew Holy Scriptures, also known as the Old Testament, everything in it is applicable to God's people right now. All of it, if we see it through a spiritual eye, it actually brings deliverance, it brings healing, it takes us into intercession, it positions us perfectly for what God is doing. And so it becomes so important that we understand these scriptures. And this is what the Priesthood Academy is going to be all about. It's training God's people all over the world. That's why it's the Priesthood Academy International. We'll be training God's people all over the world in these biblical truths. And we have people who have joined us from other countries. It's not just going to be the United States. We'll be live in Newport News, and we will also be broadcasting all over the world, training people in various nations that they might be priests where they are and where they live. You can be a part of it. Go to TruthinSpirit.org and you'll see Priesthood Academy on that homepage. You can just click that and you read all about the Priesthood Academy. You can join us. We will have a conference called tomorrow night to really talk about the Priesthood Academy, the Biblical New Year, Passover, unleavened bread, and first fruits, which actually falls on the same day as Easter this year. So we've got some preparation to do. God is positioning us for some great things and to help his people transition into biblical truths and away from paganism. But we've got to equip you as his royal priesthood to be able to take that message forward. That's what we're talking about tonight. I'm so excited about it. I do hope that you'll join us, connect with the Priesthood Academy, or just join us for our services, because starting this biblical new year, starting this Shabbat, this Saturday, we'll start having our temple services at 3 p.m. instead of 2. Now, this one is a special one, so it may be an extended service because it's the biblical new year. It's Yeshua's true birthday. It is the anniversary of the Truth in the Spirit, this ministry. It's my ministry leader anniversary, and it's also the anniversary of our first temple service. God has always taught us to do things in order. They had their very first service in the tabernacle in the desert on the first day of the biblical New Year. And so when we had our first service, our first temple service, it was also on the first day of the biblical New Year. And so these are so many anniversaries that are happening on God's biblical New Year, including Yeshua's real birthday, which we'll talk about tonight as well. I'm very excited about that. So I do hope that you'll join us. You'll also remember, and we're going to read it in the scripture tonight, that the biblical New Year is 14 days before Passover. So when we hit the biblical New Year this Friday, that lets us know we've got 2 weeks before Passover, because Passover is the 14th day of the new month, that first month of the new year. And so we've got 2 weeks to Passover. And we are having 2 Passover Seders, one in Hampton and one in Williamsburg, because we're trying to make sure everybody in Tide Order can join us for Passover. And what I want to encourage you to do is to order your Passover Seder tickets right now. We will only be selling Seder tickets through this weekend live. If you join us live at the service on the 17th, or online, the last day to purchase them will be March 19th, which is Monday. So you want to get your Seder tickets now. We've got to have a head count. We're preparing all types of food, live worship, and we need to know who's coming and how many are coming. So please, please order your Seder tickets now. Share it with everyone and make sure you get them, because we've got to know who's coming, that we can be prepared. We prepare the food, we prepare the atmosphere, and we want to really, really lift up Messiah Yeshua, who is the Lamb of God. I'm excited about it. So I do hope you'll join us. You can order those Seder tickets online at TruthinSpirit.org. Just go to that homepage and you'll see the picture for the Seders, and then you click on it and let us know which one you want to come to after you order your tickets. And so I look forward to seeing you there, because we are going to do the things that we're talking about tonight. I never want to be one who's just a hearer of the word, or one who is just a preacher of the word, where I tell people this is what you ought to be doing. And you may get some level of conviction as we're looking at these truths, but I want you to know right up front, this is why I started with the announcements, that not only will we continue to train you through the Priesthood Academy, but we will also help transition you and help you to transition others through the conference call tomorrow night. If you'd like to know more about Priesthood Academy, you will prepare for Passover and the feasts of unleavened bread and first fruits, which falls on the same day as Easter this year, then you want to be on that conference call tomorrow night from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern time. If you'd like to get the dial-in information, you can call on your phone, or you can actually log in on your computer. You must email me before 5 p.m. tomorrow, before 5 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday, the 15th. You've got to email me, because that call is at 7 p.m. So email me at info@truthinspirit.org. That's INFO at truthinspirit, spirit.org. And I will send you out that conference call info so that you can get prepared for all that's coming, because we want to help you to observe these feasts and to do everything God is calling you to do. I have a call on Monday, which is the 19th, March 19th, for pastors and ministry leaders, to help you prepare your ministries and to prepare your service. You'll have a resurrection service already planned. I want to help you to prepare your ministry to introduce first fruits. It's a perfect opportunity, and we want to prepare you for it as you are ministering to your people. And so pastors and leaders, if you're interested in that conference call, again, email me at info@truthinspirit.org before the 19th, because that's when the conference call is. It's on Monday the 19th from 6:30 p.m. to 8 p.m. And so I'm excited about it, and I pray that you are too, and that you're blessed. And so we're going to dive right in. I want to share with you how God's timeline works, because his timing is different than our timing. It's very different than time in the Western world. It's very different than the Gregorian calendar. It's different than the way we look at our days, weeks, months. It's a completely different system. And so I want to take you first to Numbers chapter 28. Numbers chapter 28, actually both 28 and 29, those two chapters, when you put them together, they reveal the Levitical responsibilities for every biblical feast day. And it starts with the daily offerings, meaning the priest had a responsibility daily within the temple of God. And these were regular days. They weren't even a feast days, just regular days. They had daily responsibilities of offerings that they had to give to the Lord. Then there were Shabbat offerings, which means they were weekly offerings, and they had to do the daily offering in addition to the Shabbat offering on Shabbat. Then there are monthly offerings, which you'll see start in verse 11 in Numbers chapter 28. And this is where you're going to get your understanding of how God orders his months. So you want to know how the biblical month is ordered, so we'll know why we are starting a new year here, March 16th to sundown. So this is how God orders the biblical months. Starting in verse 11, you'll see the things that are supposed to be offered on the head of each month, which we're going to come back to before we finish this Bible study. But there's a particular verse that I want to point out to you because of the wording in it. It's at the end of verse 14, and this is in Numbers chapter 28. It reads, "This is the monthly burnt offering to be made at each new moon during the year." Now, what that tells you is that the new moon is how God starts a month. It's at the time of the new moon. That is when the month begins. It begins when the new moon is positioned in the sky where you can't even really see it. The new moon is one you can't hardly see. You can see all the others, even the crescents and all that, you can see them, but the new moon is pretty much hidden. You can't see hardly the moon at all. And the blessing of God in that is that he did not want us to be worshiping the moon. He just wanted us to use the moon as a marker. The moon is a marker for us of God's seasons. And so the new moon tells us that God is starting a new month. Now, let us go to Genesis chapter 1. I want to back that up for you and then also talk to you about how God orders his days. So in Genesis chapter 1, I'm going to read this out of the Complete Jewish Bible. That verse that I read out of Numbers chapter 28, verse 14, the second half of verse 14 was out of the NIV. But now we're looking in Genesis chapter 1, and we want to look at the fact, I'm going to confirm for you that the moon, the sun, and the stars are there to help us mark God's biblical times, which is very, very important that we understand this. And so starting in verse 14, when we get to the fourth day, says, "God said, let there be lights in the dome of the sky to divide the day from the night. Let them be for signs, seasons, days, and years. And let them be for lights in the dome of the sky to give light to the earth." And that is how it was. God made the two great lights, the larger light to rule the day and the smaller light to rule the night, and the stars. God put them in the dome of the sky to give light to the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. So there was evening and there was morning, a fourth day. So now what we need to know about this fourth day is that when we look at verse 14, again, we're in verse 14, and 14 is a key number tonight. We were in verse 14 in Numbers chapter 28. Now we're in verse 14 in Genesis chapter 1, and Passover comes on the 14th day of the biblical month. Very key. And today just happens to be March 14th. Just want to be paying attention to what God is trying to tell us right now. So here we are, Genesis chapter 1, starting at verse 14 on our fourth day. God says, "Let there be lights in the dome of the sky to divide the day from the night. Let them be for signs, seasons, days, and years." And in the Hebrew, he uses the word there, moedim. Moedim means divine appointments, meaning that the lights in the sky, which are the sun, the moon, and the stars, are to tell us God's seasons and signs, but his divine appointments for us. So all of these things we're going to look at here, the biblical New Year, Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits. The reason we know what they are is because God is telling us how to order our times based off of the moon, the sun, and the stars. It's not for fortune telling, because God strictly forbids that. It's not for trying to chart our course or learn more about ourselves or others. It's so that we would know the seasons, and so we would know our divine appointments with God. He wants us to be on time for our appointments with him. These moedim are times that God has set apart to spend intimate time with his people. He wants to bless his bride. He wants to bless the believers. He wants to bless Israel. And he comes in a beautiful intimate but powerful form to his people on his Moedim and his divine appointments. And so it behooves us to be present for them. And he gives prescriptions as to how we are to present ourselves. And so these are the things that we are learning. And we do these on other times, but they're not always on the times that God himself has set, which means he will be present with us because he is ever present. And he loves our worship because we should worship him every single day. However, when we show up for the divine appointments and we're in corporate worship, because that is one of the things that's required, he shows up so beautifully and powerfully in our presence that we are changed forever. And that's what's supposed to happen. We're supposed to be delivered. We're supposed to be healed. We're supposed to receive ministry. We're supposed to minister to him. And that intimacy with him is supposed to be all the more greater because we are showing up on the times that he himself set, and we're doing it according to his prescribed ways. So here we are, understanding in verse 14 that these Moedim are being revealed to us as we pay attention to the sun, moon, and the stars. Now, we just read in Numbers 28:14 that it's the new moon that tells us when the month begins. Now, we also heard here in verse 19 that this is how the day is ordered. There is evening and there is morning. And it says that after each day. On the first day, same thing. On verse 5 of Genesis chapter 1, it says, so there was evening and there was morning one day. And then in verse 8, it says there was evening and there was morning the second day. Continuing on, that's the second day. The third day, verse 13, there was evening and there was morning the third day. What I'm pointing out to you is that God's days begin when evening begins. That's when the Lord counts a day. That's why I said the biblical New Year starts at sundown on March 16th, because once we hit into evening, this is when the new day starts. Now, when we get into Genesis chapter 12, God gives us even more specific revelation as to what that actual time is, where that new day starts. So here we are in Genesis chapter 12, and there's so much goodness in Genesis chapter 12. I will come back to this in the next 2 weeks of Bible study as I'm preparing you for Passover and unleavened bread. But tonight, I really want to make sure you understand the biblical New Year, because that starts this weekend. So here we are, Exodus chapter 12. In Exodus chapter 12, they're preparing to leave Egypt. And starting in verse 1, I'm reading from the Complete Jewish. It says, Adonai spoke to Moshe and Aaron, and Moshe is Moses, and Adonai is the Lord, in the land of Egypt. He said, verse 2, you are to begin your calendar with this month. It will be the first month of the year for you. So here we are, Exodus chapter 12, verse 2. He tells us that he told Moses and Aaron right before they left out of Egypt, this is your first month. This is the first month of your year. Now, we read in Numbers 28, verse 14, that the month begins with a new moon. But he continues on and he tells us about the Passover. See, they are about to experience the Passover, which is 2 weeks away from the biblical New Year. It's 14 days away. And this is where you can find that. It's here in Exodus chapter 12. Verse 3, the Lord is still speaking to Moses and Aaron. He says, speak to all the assembly of Israel and say, on the 10th day of this month, which month? The first month of the year. Each man is to take a lamb or a kid for his family, one per household, except that if a household is too small for a whole lamb or kid, then he and his next door neighbor should share one, dividing it in proportion to the number of people eating it. Your animal must be without defect, a male in its first year, and you may choose it from either the sheep or the goats. Now watch this. This is where you see Passover. You are to keep it until the 14th day of the month, and then the entire assembly of the community will slaughter it at dusk. That's very important. It makes it very clear. When does that happen? At dusk, because this is where that day is beginning. That day is beginning at dusk. Remember, he said there was evening and there was morning the first day. So we see our day beginning. This Passover day, this 14th day of the month, is beginning at dusk. This is where it starts. That's the day. So when we hit sunset, a day has passed, and now we're entering into a new day. Very important. So they slaughtered at dusk, of course, and they take the blood and smear it on the two sides and the top of the door frame of the house where they're going to eat it. They roast the meat in the fire and eat it with matzah, which is unleavened bread, and marrow, which is bitter herbs. Now, this is important that we get that, because we'll continue to talk about Passover as we go on. But what you need to know about this with regard to the biblical New Year is that as you keep going through Exodus chapter 12, you see that they actually do right now. They do exactly what he says. They take the lambs, they slaughter the lambs, they eat the lambs, put the blood over the doorframes of the houses. Death passes over them. This is also in Exodus chapter 12. Pharaoh wakes up, his firstborn son is dead. All of Egypt is crying because there's not one household that doesn't have someone dead. Everyone experienced a death. Even the livestock, the firstborn, gone, because it's going to be the best of the flock, gone. Then finally, Pharaoh lets them go. This is the first Passover. Now, what's important for you to note is that Passover, that very first Exodus, leaving out of Egypt, it marks the first month. It's not the first day of the month, because remember, Passover is on the 14th day of the month. So it was 2 weeks since a new moon had occurred, because we read in Numbers 28, that the new moon marks the beginning of the month and the beginning of the year in this case. And 14 days later is Passover. So this is where we're getting our times. Now, let me tell you why it's important in the heart of God that the day begins at dusk. It begins at sunset. Why is that important to God? If we go back to Genesis chapter 1, I'm going to take you back to what we were just reading. In Genesis chapter 1, it reads, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." That's verse 1. "The earth was unformed and void. Darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the surface of the water." So the first thing that we see is darkness. There's darkness, void, Spirit of God is there. Now we see, verse 3, "Then God said," God speaks, "Let there be light," or in the original Hebrew, "light be." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and he divided the light from the darkness. Now this becomes very, very, very important, because he continues on and it says he called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and there was evening, beginning of the day, and morning, the first day. So what happens is things start with darkness. But let's go to Revelation to see how things end. In the Revelation, there's so much beauty there. In Revelation chapter 21, I love chapter 21. It's such a beautiful, beautiful chapter. Chapter 22, also beautiful. But we see a lot of great things in chapter 21. So God makes all these things new. He wipes tears away from everyone's eyes. And then there's in verse 22, this is Revelation chapter 21, verse 22, it says, "I saw no temple in the city." This is the New Jerusalem that came out of heaven. "For Adonai, the Lord, the God of heaven's armies, is its temple, as is the Lamb." Look at verse 23. "The city has no need for the sun or the moon to shine on it, because God's Shekinah, his glory, gives it light, and its lamp is the Lamb. The nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their splendor into it. The gates will never close. They will stay open all day, because night will not exist there." Now, this is where we have to stop. I want you to understand what has happened. In the beginning, there was darkness and void. And God hovered over it, and he spoke light. He separated the light from the darkness, and the light was the beginning. So he starts the days with that. The darkness was the beginning. So he starts the days with the darkening. There was evening, then there was morning, and that's the first day. So you got darkness first. There was darkness first. Then God said, "Light be," then there was light. When we get to the end of all things, darkness is completely gone. He's already thrown the enemy into the lake of fire. Everyone who is not in covenant with the Lord and not in the Lamb's book of life and washed by the blood of the Lamb, lake of fire. All demons, lake of fire. Death, hell, the grave, lake of fire. Anything that would cause God's people to cry, gone. It's in the lake of fire. Now we dwell with him forever. God with us. He is the temple. He is the light. The Lamb is the lamp, magnifying the light of God. And night no longer exists. Darkness no longer exists. So Genesis starts with darkness. The Revelation ends with eternal light. No more darkness ever again. Now, this is important because we see God's order of things. There's darkness first, and then there's light. And that is a day. A day starts with darkness, and it ends with light. The light is gone, the day is gone. And then we start with darkness again. We went to a new cycle because darkness is first. And it's important that we get the darkness is first because it gives us so much hope. Because light wins. Light triumphs. At the end, there will be light and there will be no more darkness. So God orders the days so that we would have hope that darkness is going to disappear and light is coming. It's not the other way around, where we start in light and then we end in darkness. How dreadful would that be? How despairing would that be if we had light and then the light disappeared and darkness was the end of the matter? Darkness is not going to win. Light is the end of the matter. And our days, our biblical days, reflect that. They start in darkness where we should be preparing, we should be sleeping, we should be rejuvenating. And then we go into light ready to work and do great things and worship and spend time with God and loving our families because we've got this light. And at the end of all things, we'll do that all the time. We'll worship God all the time. We'll fellowship all the time. That's going to be the end of the matter. It's not going to be darkness. It's not going to end with darkness. It's going to end with light. This is why God's days are ordered the way they're ordered. Evening first and then morning. Even when we look at the Passover, that evening was a scary evening. They had to slaughter this lamb that they loved and they gotten so close to. They had to put the blood over the door frames of the houses. They had to roast this lamb. They had to eat this lamb. And they had to wait for death to go by, to pass over them. That's kind of scary. When you know people are dying, you can hear the cries of the people who have found their loved ones dead. And you are waiting and still in God's presence as death passes over you. But then in the morning, there's this glorious freedom. Out of slavery, no longer in bondage. You're going into a promised land. This was one day. That was one day. We eat the Passover lamb, death passes over us, and in the morning we're free. That's one day. That wasn't 2 different days. That's one day. And we see that in Exodus chapter 12. This is so important. And when we look at Exodus chapter 12, there's so much there. So much more there for us to understand. He also says you will begin your times here. You will begin your months here. This is the first month of your year. Now, they had been in slavery for 430 years to the day. God said, this is when you start counting time, when I'm bringing you out. And that is the beauty for even us as believers to know that we maybe have been alive for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years before we give ourselves over to the Lord, before we partake of our Passover lamb, the Lamb of God who is Messiah Yeshua, before we put that blood over the doorframe of our family's home so that death passes over our whole household, because our whole households will be saved. We get to understand that even no matter how long it's been before we receive that, God counts our times then. He starts counting our times when he's redeeming us, when he's giving us the instructions to bring us out. That's when he starts counting our times. And it wasn't Passover day, it wasn't the first day, 14 days before that. But he'd been giving them the instructions for this whole 2 weeks. You're starting your month. You got to bring the lamb in 10 days. You got to prepare to be free. Go and ask the Egyptians to give you wealth. And then they come out of Egypt with all types of wealth, so much wealth that they brought Moses so many offerings for the tabernacle that he had to tell the people to stop. Don't bring any more offerings for the tabernacle. We don't need anything else. Take your wealth back. We don't need any more wealth. And the beauty of all of this is that we've had some times that we're in bondage and slavery to sin and just brokenness. And God says, I don't count those times. I'm coming to pull you out of that. I'm redeeming you out of that. And I'm bringing you into my promise. I myself am going before you. I'm going to teach you my ways and my laws, and I'm going to redeem you from death. And I'm going to bring your whole family, your whole people into this beautiful promise, this inheritance that I have for you. Now, for us as believers, particularly for the church, not necessarily the Messianic community, but for the church, this is a big deal. Let me tell you why. Because it's time for us to come out of our wilderness. For 1,700 years, the church has wandered in the desert. And even that word church just doesn't appear anywhere in the Bible. Originally, the word is ecclesia, which is assembly of the called out ones. That's in the Greek. And in the Hebrew, in the Old Testament, or the Hebrew Holy Scriptures, the Tanakh, it's kahelet, which is, again, assembly of the called out ones. Those two words are the words that we need: congregation, assembly. That's who we are. And so the point is, and that's the same for the Messianic community or the church. We're the one assembly, we're the one assembly, we're the one congregation, we're the kahelet. We are the ecclesia. That's who we are. And the point here is that in the 4th century, Emperor Constantine, at the Council of Nicaea, he decreed that we should not have anything to do with the detestable company of the Jew, because he was tired of hearing the Jews boast that we cannot keep the feast without them. These are his words. And he said, so instead of Passover, we will keep the sacred festival of Easter. And he replaces Passover with Easter, which was a fertility festival to the goddess Ishtar, hence the bunnies and the chicks and the eggs. All that was about fertility. It's actually a pretty gruesome idolatrous story behind it. It's not a nice story, certainly not something for children. And we've carried that heritage of paganism for 1,700 years. He didn't want to keep Shabbat anymore, which God never changes it in the Bible from the 7th day of the week. He never changes it. He institutes it and does not change it. The 1st century believers went to synagogues on Shabbat. You'll see that James actually says it at the Jerusalem Council in Acts chapter 15. That they hear of Moses on Shabbat in the synagogues. So there was not a change of Shabbat. That never, ever changed. Constantine changed it. 4th century, Council of Nicaea, because he had previously been a sun god worshiper, and he was used to worshiping on Sunday, which was the day for the sun god. That's why we call it Sunday, is because it's a day of sun god worship. And we have all types of idolatry. Monday is moon day. I mean, there's all types of idolatry in our days and months and weeks and years and planet names. I mean, we got idolatry in all types of areas of our culture. But within the body of believers, unfortunately, the Sabbath day shifted to Sunday, and the times being like Western times as opposed to biblical times, not starting at sunset. We're starting at other times, either at midnight, which is complete darkness, as opposed to the dusk where it's coming in, or at sunset, the day starts when the sun rises. Either way, it's off from God's calculation, because it still ends in darkness. God says our day is to end in light. That's the end of our day. When the light is diminishing, that's the end of our light, end of our day, because light is the end. Light wins. Light triumphs. Light is victorious. Light is the end, not the beginning. Light is the end. And so what we see here is that as a body of believers, we have wandered in paganism for 1,700 years, even celebrating the birth of Messiah on December 25th. December 25th is the winter solstice. It's the shortest day of the year, and it was celebrated by lots of different groups. Canaanites, the Romans, the Greeks, witches still keep that day. Actually, the winter solstice is still very, very important in witchcraft. Very important. And because it was already a festival on December 25th, the Catholic Church decided that day would be a day of Christ for the masses. Meaning the Catholic Church had an ideology that those who were not priests really were not learned and didn't understand the Bible. And so they were going to be sinful anyway. There was this understanding that just the people are going to be sinful. And so what they gave them was that day for the people. December 25th, you're already going to have your winter solstice party. So we're going to give you Christ because you're the masses. I'm going to give you Christ for the masses on the day that you do your winter solstice parties. It had debauchery and drinking and all that. This is why all the Christmas office parties and sometimes the family parties just end up in all types of sinful behaviors, because that's where it started. That's where those December 25th gatherings started. It started in debauchery and alcoholism and other things. But the point is that continued, but they put the stamp of Christ on it, because now this day will be Christ for the masses, because they were trying to get the masses to stop doing all those sinful things on that day and instead incorporate Christ. And so then it's Christ's birthday. And honestly, the Puritans outlawed Christmas. They said it was a pagan festival and they would not have anything to do with it. So the church for about 200 years did not celebrate Christmas at all. Not anywhere in Europe or the United States. It made a comeback in the 18th century. But it was out. It was outlawed, and there was no Christmas for a long time because its pagan roots were very, very clear to everybody. Now we've kind of accepted some things. A lot of compromises occurred, but Yeshua wasn't born anywhere near December 25th. He was born in Biblical New Year. He was born. We're going to celebrate his true birthday this weekend at our service on March 17th at 3 p.m. because that's the day that he was born. And so I want you to see this chronology. I want you to see this, how this works as God is fulfilling scripture. Yeshua was born on the Biblical New Year, right? He's crucified on Passover. He is our unleavened bread because he's the bread of life without sin. The unleavened bread is bread without yeast. That yeast represents sin. And he said that we had to eat of him, that we be one with him. And unleavened bread is all about partaking of the unleavened bread, the matzah. And all of the grain offerings, which were unleavened bread, always had their drink offering, which was wine. And he said we have to also drink of his blood. And this institutes our communion, which we also see, of course, is in the Passover Seder. You have the unleavened bread and the cup. This is where you see Yeshua. He's the Passover lamb, but he's also the unleavened bread. And the cup that accompanies the unleavened bread. There's always a cup of wine or fruit of the grape that accompanies the unleavened bread. Then Yeshua is resurrected on first fruits. And you'll see in 1 Corinthians 15:20, he is the first fruits of those resurrected. And because he was resurrected holy as the first fruits, that means everything to be resurrected after him is also deemed holy. So you see the order here. He is fulfilling scripture. Biblical New Year, he's born. Crucified on Passover. He is our unleavened bread. He fulfilled that during the time of the Passover. And he's resurrected on first fruits. Then on Shavuot, which we also call Pentecost, he sends the Holy Spirit. He fulfills those in order. They happened in order, and he fulfilled them. What is yet to be fulfilled is Yom Teruah, the day of sounding the shofar. It is wrongly called Rosh Hashanah, and we'll talk about that in a minute, why it's actually not Rosh Hashanah. Then there is Yom Kippur, the day of purging. Literally, it means purging, because the sin will be purged from you, it's the atonement, or you'll be purged out of God's presence. That's what happens on Yom Kippur. Something's getting purged, because no wickedness and no flesh can stand in God. Then the third thing is Sukkot, where we dwell with God forever. See, that's got to be fulfilled too. So after he's announced himself, Yom Teruah, the day of sounding the shofar, we see that being fulfilled in 1 Thessalonians 4:16 and 17, where Yeshua comes back with the great shofar sound. He's going to come back when the shofar sounds. Then Judgment Day, Revelation chapter 20, at the end of that chapter, the Ancient of Days comes, makes judgment, and he purges out of his presence everything that's wicked and everything that makes his people cry. Then in Revelation 21, Sukkot is fulfilled, because the dwelling of God is now with men, and he dwells with us forever. And so those three will be fulfilled. But those others that I just mentioned, the 4 annual feast days and the Biblical New Year, Yeshua fulfilled them already. Now, how do we know Yeshua was born on the Biblical New Year? There's been lots and lots of studies and lots of research done. But the only evidence we have, which is actually, there's a lot of biblical reasoning evidence, but I'm talking about factual chronological evidence, is that Zechariah, he tells us when he went on duty in the temple. And so I'm going to show that to you I'm going to go to the Gospels. And we'll see that Zechariah was on duty. Let's see, I believe it's in Luke. Where we see here that in Luke chapter 1, we see that Zechariah, in verse 5, it says, Zechariah, who belonged to the Abijah, you say in the other ones, division. He's a priest. His wife was a descendant of Aaron, and her name was Elisheva or Elizabeth. Now, this is what's so important. The Abijah division, we know when they were working, because David actually lists all the divisions of the priests in Chronicles. We see that David wrote the list, and when they were in Chronicles trying to reestablish the priesthood, they went back and they saw all the divisions. Now, the Abijah division is the one that Zechariah is on. And the priests continue to keep records throughout all the years as to when these cycles were. There were 24 cycles, so they worked 2 weeks. 24 cycles. We know when the Abijah division was. And so we continue to count, because we remember that Elizabeth was 6 months pregnant with Yochanan, Yeshua's older cousin, or John, the immerser or baptizer. She was 6 months pregnant with John when Mary shows up having just conceived. So we know then that John was conceived 6 months before Yeshua. So we count from when Zechariah was in the temple, then the Abijah division, and the priests have counted from there. The Jewish priests have counted from there to bring forward to 6 months John being in Elisheva's womb or Elizabeth's womb, and then Yeshua being conceived 9 months from there. Where does it take us to? And they have counted those days, and it brings us right to Biblical New Year, which is when Yeshua was born, in the Biblical New Year. And Rabbi Jonathan Cahn does an excellent teaching on it. If you don't believe me, look it up. Put when was Jesus really born, Jonathan Cahn, and you'll see it's an excellent teaching. But the point is that Yeshua fulfilled the Biblical New Year by being born. And this is another beautiful thing that Rabbi Cahn says about this, is that when you look at human time, our time started over when Yeshua was born. You've got BC and you've got AD, and it's Yeshua's birth that actually breaks our calendar. Our calendar is split in 2 parts, specifically by Yeshua's birth. So literally the biblical calendar splits our human calendar because he was born on the Biblical New Year. It's just like God to interrupt our times and put his timing right in the middle of that, which is just amazing. It's a beautiful revelation of God interrupting human time to do what he wants to do, and our times were changed forever because we start counting them from there going forward. And it's just a great revelation of what the Lord has done and always does. He'll allow us to go on our own way for a while until he interrupts us, and he will have his way on his days. And it behooves us to line up, because if we line up with the will of God, we get tremendous blessings. For the children of Israel, back to Exodus chapter 12, for the children of Israel that did not bring the lamb into their home on the 10th day, slaughter it at dusk, put the blood on the doorframes of their home, over fire, eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs, and stay in the home until death passed over, they lost their firstborn, just like the Egyptians did. This is the only plague where God did not make a distinction between Egyptians and Israelites, or Hebrews at this time. He did not make a distinction between them. In the first 3 plagues, everybody got those plagues. The 4th plague, plague of flies, God says, I'll make a distinction between the Israelites or the Hebrews and the Egyptians. And so from 4 to 9 does not happen in Goshen. It does not happen to the children of Israel. Not at all. Even the darkness that was so dark it could be felt, there was light in Goshen. And when Moses went to go see Pharaoh, there's some wonderful historical documents written about this. When Moses went to go see Pharaoh, he took light with him into the darkness of Egypt. This is how he found Pharaoh. Into the darkness of Egypt, Moses brought light with him to go see Pharaoh, so Pharaoh could ask him, pray for us so this darkness can go away. And he prayed, of course, and the darkness went away. But this particular one, this 10th plague right here, it was the same for the Jew and the Gentile, for the Israelite and those of the nations. If they did not slaughter the lamb, put the blood on the door frames of their homes, eat the lamb, and stay within the house, They lost the firstborn. And that's a big deal because salvation is for everyone. Any one of us can take the lamb into our home, love the lamb, slaughter the lamb, put the blood on the doorframes of our homes, ingest the lamb, and keep our family together within the household of faith, in the house of God, that death will pass over us forever. Any one of us can do it. You don't have to be a Jew. You don't have to be Israelite. You don't have to be a Hebrew. All you have to be is obedient. You just have to believe God when he says it and obey his instructions because you believe him. And then the blood is on your house. And this is a big deal for us because all of these things remind us of who God really is. It reveals the truth about who God is. And this is why we must celebrate. This is why we must worship him, because when we keep the pagan festivals, when we keep unbiblical rituals, we train ourselves and our children wrongly. I remember when I was pregnant with my son Joshua, God said to me that he was to be a Nazarite and to be set apart from birth. I was never to cut his hair. That's why he has the long dreadlocks. Most people wonder about that because God told me not to ever cut his hair because he would be set apart from birth, as you see John Yochanan was, John the Immerser or Baptist. And then you also see another Nazarite was Samson, also set apart from birth. Both of them are set apart from birth. And later on, Paul takes a Nazarite vow, but it was a temporary vow. To be a Nazarite for life, your parents have to dedicate you to God from birth and never cut your hair. And so what becomes important to note here is that when I was carrying him, God was telling me how he wanted me to raise him. Just as he had given Samson's parents instructions about raising him, God was giving me instructions. And my husband was hearing similar things, and we were talking about it, and it was very interesting. And so getting these instructions about Joshua, God named him and everything. As I was carrying him, my daughter lost a tooth. And I said to God, I said, Lord, I don't know what to do about this, because we used to do Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus and all that stuff. I said, Lord, I don't know what to do about this because you kind of brought us out of that, and I don't know how to handle this. And he said, you had better tell her the truth now, because your son is not to come in that way. Meaning Joshua was not to be born into the world believing these pagan things at all. Like he was never to be even introduced to those things. So the year he was born actually born in December, was the last Christmas we had as a family. After that, there were never any more Christmas trees, anything like that. But that day, he told me, tell her now. So I woke her up, and I didn't put the money under her pillow or anything like that for the tooth. I woke her up and I told her about the Tooth Fairy, Easter Bunny, and Santa Claus, that they weren't real, and why people kept, we celebrated these things. We thought it was fun for the kids and all of that. And so it was important for me to just let her know they are not real. I don't want you to believe in them because God is telling me, no, I said, I don't want you to believe in them because they're not real. And she said to me, like God. And I said, no, not like God. God is very real. And in that moment, I realized that because she can't see any of them, not the Easter Bunny, not the Tooth Fairy, not Santa Claus, not God, that in her little mind, they were all like the same. She can't see them, and they give her stuff. She don't know how it get there. And they were all the same. So when I told her that those other three weren't real, it challenged her faith in God. I did not know that these things were being merged in my daughter's mind because they are idols, actually. God is very real. And this is why he needed those idols to be cast down in our household and in our family, because he didn't want my son to have that same crisis of faith. And most of us remember the crisis of faith we had when we found out that Santa Claus wasn't real, or some other mythical character that we thought was real wasn't real. We had some type of crisis of faith. Maybe we didn't believe our parents anymore. Maybe we didn't trust what people would say anymore. Like, there were crises within us. Little ones, hopefully, but crises nonetheless. But for my daughter, it would have been a big one, because she had associated all of them together. And this was something I did not know until I told her that day that they weren't real. And the reason I'm pointing this out to you is because God is saying for his people that we've got to come out of that desert. 1,700 years we've been lifting up idols, and we've been teaching them to our children. We had them involved in fertility festivals, which is idolatry. It's paganism. And really the Easter eggs themselves, the reason they're colored is because people would have orgies during this festival of Ishtar. And the point of the orgy was to increase fertility. They thought it would make them more fertile. So they would have these orgies in the next year. So 9 months later, we got these babies that are born. So they keep the babies for 3 months. When we get to the next festival of Ishtar, they would sacrifice those 3-month-old babies and dip eggs in the blood of those babies that were sacrificed. So then they would put eggs on the red dip eggs, and they would put them on the windowsills to reveal to people how many babies they had sacrificed to Ishtar. So it was a big deal if you had a lot of eggs, because you sacrificed all these babies to Ishtar. This is where we get the painted eggs from, and we're going around having our children find those and pick them up out of the grass. They're representing murdered babies. And then we wonder why we have this epidemic of abortion in our community, but we have these type of festivals that murdered babies. It's, spiritually speaking, if we're going to pray about abortion, we've got to get rid of the seed of Ishtar that wants the blood of babies. We've got to kill that seed. It has to come at least first out of the house of God. It has to come out of the house of God. When you see those eggs, when you see the Christmas tree, all those were fertility symbols. We should see pagan idols. And once you learn their history, you'll see idols. You won't see them like you used to see them before. Something beautiful, something fun, something whimsical, something that is involved in worship of God. You won't see it that way anymore. You'll understand that it's our golden calf. I actually did a teaching 2 years ago. The Christmas tree, is it our golden calf? Is the Christmas tree our golden calf? It's on this YouTube channel. You want to look at that, because it absolutely is. God has given us blessings, and we have made idols to Baal to them. And that's what the Christmas tree is, actually an idol to Baal. Terrible, horrible story that I won't even tell you. It's actually disgusting. You'd be surprised that believers associate good things with God with horrible pagan reproductive fertility festivals, because most of them had to do with fertility. It's time for us to come out of this desert, this 1700-year desert of paganism and idol worship. It's time for us to leave that golden calf in the desert where it belongs. Come out of slavery in our own mind, still wishing for Egypt. When God said, I have brought you out of Egypt, and now is when you count your times. And what blesses me is that means that those 1700 years where the body of believers have been wandering in the desert and worshiping idols, either known to us or unbeknownst to us, God's not counting those times. He's counting right now. When we say, God, we're starting anew. We're going into this biblical new year, and we're going to learn your ways, and we're going to allow you to transition us into the truth. He's a beautiful God. He doesn't rip the rug out from under us. He knows how damaging that can be to our soul. He removes that false foundation one brick at a time, and he replaces it with living stones of his truth. Removes the man-made bricks, which is what they made the Tower of Babel with, and he replaces it with living stones, which is what his altar is made of stones. And we are living stones in that altar. That becomes so important. So now, as a body of believers, there's no more arguing about doctrine, because God makes the truth very plain and very clear. It's not up to the sky where we have to say, well, who's going to go up and get it. And it's not in the sea where we need to ask who's going to go in the ocean and get the truth for us. The truth is very near to us. It's on our hearts, and it's near our lips. It's right here at our mouths. The truth is very near, that we would trust God and we would obey him and we believe him, and we would move forward boldly and confidently into that which he has for us. And so I pray that encourage you to, not think about those New Year's resolutions for January 1, because that was not the new year. It wasn't a true new year. But sundown March 16th, to seek God about how he can transition you into his truths. And you can bring your whole household with you, bring your whole ministry with you, and other people in your extended family. You can start teaching them these truths. He will gently minister it to you, and he'll empower you with his spirit to walk out those truths. If you have fear about that, go to our website, TruthinSpirit.org, and watch the video, The Truth in the Spirit. That's not just about this ministry. It's about the fact that when we receive God's truths, he gently puts them in our hearts and empowers us by his spirit to walk them out. And when we teach it, we teach you to seek God for yourself, that he would give you the timeline to make these shifts in your life. Because we didn't get here in just a moment. It took 1700 years. And we're not going to come out in one day like the children of Israel did. There are certain things that he'll pull from us immediately, but we've still got to do that desert walk ourselves, where we're walking away from the bondage. We're walking away from the sin, and we're walking toward all the promises of God. And every time we drop off some idolatry, some paganism, we get more freedom, more revelation, more intimacy with God, and more connection with each other, because we're all based in the same doctrine, the same truth. Not debatable. It's right here in black and white, and we believe all of it. When they were speaking, they were teaching right out of Tanakh, the Hebrew Holy Scriptures, because those words are still very vital and true right now. Yeshua said it in Matthew chapter 5. He did not come to abolish the Torah or the prophets, but to fulfill them. And he said, those who keep these commandments and teach others will be called great in the kingdom of heaven, but those who break even the least of these commandments and teach others to do the same will be the least in the kingdom of heaven. And the Lord revealed to me very clearly that the least in the kingdom of heaven is not that you're going to get a smaller crown or a smaller mansion. Being least in the kingdom of heaven means you get thrown into the lake of fire. That's least, because even the lake of fire is covered by God's dominion. And so you don't want to be least. Being least in the kingdom of heaven is to come before the Lord and saying, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? And he says, depart from me, I never knew you, you workers of iniquity. That is least in the kingdom of heaven, and we do not want to be least. We want to be great, not because of us, because we trusted him and he empowered us to obey. That's my prayer for you. That's my prayer for the whole body of believers. Please seek God about being on that conference call tomorrow. It's free. You don't have to do anything but show up. Email me at info@TruthinSpirit.org, and I will send you the link so that you can be prepared to help make this transition in your life and in others' lives. And then prayerfully consider joining the Priesthood Academy. You can do it at TruthinSpirit.org, and join us this Saturday for the Biblical New Year worship gathering. It's going to be amazing. I'm so excited. We're going to really, really celebrate, and we're really going to receive from God's Spirit as we prepare to go into the Passover. Get your Seder tickets now. We don't want you to miss out. I pray that blessed you. It certainly blessed me. Share this video with others, because God's people have got to come out of the desert, and it is time for us to be the standard. We don't need to just know that there is a standard. We've got to receive that standard into ourselves, let him transform us, and we've got to be the standard in the earth, because we are the bride of Messiah, and he has modeled all goodness for us. I hope to see you soon, and if I don't, even if I do, have a wonderful Biblical New Year, and knowing that God himself is making all things new in your life and in you.